Alright, good evening guys. So sorry about the bad internet. So we'll change the fast recording. So as I was saying earlier, before the bad network, so I had issues with my internet. So I was talking about the uh, how external CSS work. So talking about how external CSS work automatically. So I said this. We have talked about internal. I've talked about internal. So external CSS has to do with you writing your CSS separately in another file, and that is what external CSS is doing. So what I did now was that I created my style.css externally, which is just mainly for CSS. And I told you earlier in the last class that when you are writing your CSS file externally, you save with the .css extension. So which is what I did here, style.css. This is to specify to the browser that this is the CSS file, and also tell the browser how to pass your file. So with that being said, so now even after creating your style.css or your CSS file externally, your HTML document does not know about it immediately because there can be multiple styles. I can decide to create 100 of styles now, giving them different names outside of my HTML. But my HTML document does not knows about it automatically. So I need to inform it or pass in that CSS file to the HTML document that I want you to pass this particular CSS file. And now I come into my HTML and I use what we call the link tag. So if you look at this place, it is called the link. This particular tag is called the link tag. And what does this tag does? And what is the work of this tag? What is this tag doing? So the work of this tag is to link external files, bring in external files into our HTML file, external files that our HTML or document is going to be, our HTML page or document is going to be making use of. So that is what the link tag is used for. So we can use the link tag to bring in documents like CSS and to bring in font files when we want to use external font files, because most of the time when you're building your site you use external font files, maybe from Google Store, or a default font file that you have within your local system. So you can use the link tag to bring in this file. You can use it also to link in your favicon for your web page. Now to I'll be using this link tag to bring in the document, the style document for this our web page. I want installing this our web page. Now how do I do that? Okay, let me let me start again so you guys can see. So go link and you close the tag. And I also said earlier that it is a self-closing tag, but it requires some attributes for it to work. You know what HTML attribute are. So you need to pass the rel attribute to it. So it is called the relationship attribute. So the relationship attribute is telling our HTML file what kind of file this file we are bringing into it is. So we need to pass it the kind of file it is, and we are going to pass it style sheet. So this style sheet is going to tell our document, our HTML document, that this is a CSS file. That this is a CSS file. Remember what CSS means? Cascading style sheet. That is the meaning. So it is just telling our document, our HTML document file, that this is a CSS file that I'll be making use of in this page. And if you watch what I did here, I make sure that I put this link at the header part of the page. And the reason why is because most of the time our browser reads our HTML document from the top, and when it gets to this part of the link, it tries to look for that file or goes to the server to get it and pass that document. That is why we are putting it at that heading top. I will also show an example of when you try to put your link element beneath or in another part of the page, in another part of the page, what the effect is. So now, even after we have put our rel or relationship attribute, we need to import that particular file that we need. And how do we do that? We make use of the href attribute. Make use of the href attribute. That is what we that's what we use. As you all know that the href attribute is used to link resources the same way we did within our anchor tag. That is what we use to link our page to another page. The href attribute is used to link resources to another page. So we can pass in a CSS URL, a CDN URL for our style sheet or for our CSS. For our CSS is hosted on the cloud or in a CDN server. We can pass in the URL of that CDN within this href. And now, but because our CSS is between our local file, we will pass it in the way we pass our normal document. So all you need to do is dot slash, and obviously I already talked about when you're passing documents between the pages. You have the relative parts and the absolute parts. And now I'm trying to pass that document between the same place. So I'm not going two level deeper. I'm within the same folder. So all I just need is a dot slash, which tells me that I am within the same folder. So dot slash style dot css on this. So let's go to our browser and check out what we have there. Let's go to our browser and check out what we have there, which is this guy. Now, if you see that our background is red at this point already. So to be sure that our background is working, our document, let's change it to another thing. Let's change it to maybe a yellow or let's look for a color. Let's say maybe an ash or a blue. Let's change it to a blue. Okay, let's change our background to a blue. Now, when I refresh, you see that our background has changed, but this is kind of too sharp. So let's make it an ash. So I've taught you guys about the color code. Now, so I have made it an ash. So that is what external CSS is. So now, if you try to link this your style document maybe at the bottom of your page, let us take it to the bottom of our page after the body, and let me paste it here. You will see what will happen, that you will see like a flash of white background. If you try and change the color, let me change the color to a red so it can be obvious. Red. So now, if you try and refresh the page, you see that you see a flash of white background. The reason is because our document has been passed before it gets to that particular CSS that is now applying the red background to the body of the page. So that is why we are seeing that flash of white before this our red background is appearing. So to prevent that flash of unstyled document, so we move our document back to the head into the head tag. So when we are loading our page, the browser sees the you see you can't see that flash again. That's because the browser already encounter our CSS and it does the passing before it produces to rendering our own HTML. So that is it. So that is how the browser works. So now let's now talk about some major properties in, in CSS. So last week I talked about the color property, the CSS color. So when you have CSS colors, the color property is used to specify the kind of color for a particular element. And the truth is not all elements can take colors. Not all elements can take color. The major elements that can take color are elements that are displaying a text kind of, that they are displaying a content, that they are displaying information, like the H1, the P tag, the span tag, and the div when you try to put a content in between it. So that is what those are the things that take color. And also when you specify color on maybe a parent element, it tries to affect the children. So that is how it works. So for the CSS, for a CSS property, let's use our okay, let's use our which of the tags should we use? Mm, okay, let's style our H2 tag and let's give it a color. So now this H2 tag, it can either it can take inherit. When you say something should inherit, so it looks for the color at the top of the parent. So that is what the inherit is. Um, so when I say inherit, so represent the, do you understand? It tries to look for the so it looks for the parent element and inherits the color property from the parent. That is what the inherit value does in HTML. That is what the inherit value key means in HTML. That is what the inherit value key means in HTML. When you do inherit on an element, it tries to look for the parent property and look for what the value of that thing is on its parent property. And if it is not present on that parent property, it goes upper again, up the chain to look for the next parent element and try to get what the value is on that parent element until it resolves to the root value of the browser. So that is just it. And now, so let's give it a orange. So let me reload this page. So let's change our background back to ash. So you can see that every H2 document on my page, they have become orange. They all became orange. That is what the H2, that's what the external CSS is doing now. And remember I told you that the hierarchy is when you do a styling external CSS, it's when you do a style in external CSS, you can overwrite it with the internal CSS. Then you can overwrite it with the inline CSS. So the inline CSS has what we call highest specificity. So it has the highest command, like what is specified in the inline CSS can overwrite others. So that is it. No, now let's talk about the what's it called? The three approaches of styling the elements that we talked about in the last part. Remember, I talked about the tag selector, class selector, and ID selector. Obviously, as you can see, we've made use of the tag selector on all these elements. We make use of all the tag selector on all these elements to style all our properties. Now let's talk about the class. So now there's something that is called specificity in what do we call it? Specificity in CSS. So the highest specificity we have in CSS is the ID. When you give an element an ID, and a class, because it's possible for an element to have a class and an ID, and obviously for an element to have it's a tag. So if you give those three things on an element, so it is the properties or the CSS properties that you specify with the ID that overrules the others, just like the way we have the inline, then the internal, then the external. So when you specify CSS properties on an ID selector for a particular element, it will override whatever you have specified for it on a class and on a tag. So I'm going to try that now. So let's try it with this our H2, one of our H2. So for this first H2, I'm going to give it a class. And don't forget, the class and the ID, they are attributes in CSS. They are attributes in our HTML, I mean. They are attributes in our HTML. So when you give it class equals to, then you give it, then you give it a name. What is the name you want the class to be? Let's say um, second font. Give it a class. Let's give a class of second. Give it a class of second, and we also give it an ID of second. So the reason why I can do that is because when you do that, there are two different things. You can select the way you select your ID is different. The way you select your class is different. When we get to our CSS, you will see how that works. So I do ID equals to second as well. Now remember that we have used the tag selector to style all our H2, which is why this one also here it is that which is why this particular H2 tag is styled in orange already. So now I also added a class to it. Now let me style that element by class. And also let me remind you of this. I said one, you can add a class to more than one element. You can add a class attribute, a class of same name to more than one element, of which I will do now. You can add a class of same name to more than one element. It will style all the whole elements that has that class properties, that has all those class attributes and the value that we specified. So now let me start style dot second. Now let us give it another color. Now let's give it a color blue. Let's see what happens in our browser. So if you watch, I give it a color blue, then only this particular element change to color blue and the rest are still in orange. That is because of what we call the CSS specificity. This is very important. You need to understand how the CSS specificity works because most of the time you face bugs in your code and you won't understand that it is because of the way your CSS specificity is. So the CSS specificity is that class is higher than tag selector. The class selector is higher than the tag selector. So anytime maybe you style an element with the tag selector, maybe you style out the OH2 on your page as we have done before with tonnage, then you add a class to one of the H2, then you style that specially, it automatically overwrites the styling styling rule on that particular tag that you have given to it as a tag. The class styles is class property you have specified automatically overrides those styles or the properties you have specified on it as a tag selector. So that is it. And also remember I said more than you can add a class to more than one element. So I can decide to give this class second. I can come to this H3 here as well and give it a class second. So that So if you watch, this one also has the color blue. You can put a class attribute of the same value on more than one element. You can put it of the same value on more than one element. Let's look for the second H2 on our page and let's start it that way too. Second, okay. So you see that this one too is styled with the class second styles. And it has overwritten the tag selector properties we specified on it already. So that is what it has done already. So now let's talk about the ID. So when we talk about the ID, as I said, the ID from the tag, from the class, and from the ID has the highest specificity of them all. The ID styles will overwrite every other style. And as I said, you can only add the ID only targets one element on your page. If you add ID to two places, if you add ID of the same value to two places on your HTML document, it will only target the first one and it won't work on the second one. So let's see how that works. Now we have added an ID of second to this particular H2 element. Now if you want to do when you want to style properties with the ID in your CSS, you make use of this hashtag keyword. So remember that when you want to style properties with class in your CSS, you make use of the dot sign before the name of that thing you reference in your HTML. You put a dot, then you name the value of that attribute in your HTML. So the value of that attribute in your HTML after the dot, if you are trying to style an element through class, you put a dot, you use a dot, you use what we call dot, and the name of the attribute in your HTML. So that is why I have dot second. Now I want to style it by the attributes. What you will do is you use the hashtag keyword before the name of the value that you put in your HTML. Remember that the value of the ID attribute in our HTML is second. So now that will be the selector. That will be the name of the selector in your CSS. It will be hashtag second. Hashtag second. Hashtag second. So that time I'm pointing that this is an ID selector. This is an ID selector. ID selector. ID selector. Then class selector. I'm sure you know that this is not part of my code. So this is a comment. Class selector. Now let me style this second ID. Now let me give it a color of what color, what color. Let me give it a color of purple. And let's see what happens. Now, see that this particular element that has the class that has been styled on the class with the tag and with the ID. But the ID did something. The ID overwrote the rules on the rest of it. The ID overwrote the rules on the rest of all the other styles that we have specified. The ID overwrote the rules on the other style. So that is how it works. So as I said, we have the tag at the base level, followed by the class, then followed by what we call the ID. So the ID overrides the rules of the tag selector and the class selector. So that is what the ID did. So now let's talk about one other thing. Now, as I said, before I forget, I said if we try to add the ID to two elements, to reference two elements, it is not going to work. The ID only tries to reference just one element in your HTML document. Let's do the second ID of second as well on this H3 tag and try and refresh it. You see, sorry, I'm referencing it on an H3. Let's look for another H2 element on our page. That's strange. So okay, our ID is taking more than one element. Okay, oh sorry, that's that's by me. But when you sorry, I was thinking JavaScript already. So 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 it is when you are within your JavaScript files, when you are within your JavaScript files, when you try to make use of ID, it only reference the first element and it does not reference the rest. Sorry. When you are within your JavaScript files, when you are trying to access when you are trying to access a particular element in your JavaScript using ID, it only reference the first element. That's what I mean. It only reference the first element. It is supposed to reference just the first element alone. It will not reference any other element that has that particular ID on it. Sorry. It will only reference the first element. Please take note of that. It only reference the first element in your JavaScript. So that is how it works. So that is how those three things work. I've talked about the ID, the I've talked about the ID, the class, and the tag selector. Now let's talk about some property. So one of the major property we have in our HTML, in our CSS, is what we call the display. We call it the display. So let's try and let's try and style this our navigation. So I'll say navigation. So there are different kind of display that our document comes in. Any HTML document has a default display at which it comes in. So now let us try and search what does our navigation display comes with by default in our browser. And that is why I'm going to inspect this now. Um, Obviously it is supposed to come with by default a block element. It is supposed to be a block element by default. So if you look at this part of your the browser where my mouse is going over, you see that the display is block. So the display value is block. So every of your HTML element or your HTML properties come with a particular default display within your browser. But now you can alter the display for you to make them work in the way you expect them to be. Now, what I want us to do here is that I want to restyle our navigation so that they can be on the same line instead of being in this manner of approach. So now you will come to your CSS and you do something called display. So display is a property that you use and change elements displays. So and there are different display value. So the display property can take different values, and the value is block, content, flex, flexbox, flow root, grid, inline, inline block, inline flex. I'm sure you can see the inline flexbox, inline table, list item, and none. So you guys need to go and read on these things on your own. I'll drop. I told you you can always search on the web. Go to w3schools.com to know more about these properties. Go to Mozilla Firefox to know more about these properties. Go to HTML. I'm trying to remember site. There are a lot of sites. You can go to Geeks tutor. You can go to a lot of sites to just check up how this property work. So because there are a lot of CSS display property. So now I'll change this CSS display property to what we call the flex property. Call it flex. So now let me try and do it. Now, so now that you see, if you watch my browser at this point where I was showing you the nav, my style has overwritten what we what was specified by the browser before now. Now, because I want to make it in a row format, I need to specify my width to 100%. So now I did say my navigation to take a width of 100%. Then I specify my flex direction. Oh, okay. So the reason it's not being aligned is because um I'm styling the UL. So the only reason why it's not being shown is because the UL is the only element that is under the nav. So let's change our navigation back to block. Let's leave it the way the browser left it. That is block format. And let's style our UL, our unordered list that is wrapping all our LI elements. Don't forget, the UL is wrapping all our LI elements. This is the UL. The UL tag is the parent of all our LI elements. Now, let's go to the browser and see what the default style of the UL of the block is. So look at it. Now you can see it here. That is what we call the default property of the display is also block. But because we want our elements to be in a row format, we will change the display format to what we call flex. Now let me refresh our page. Now if you look at it now, you see that links, all our navigation links are now in a row format. So that is what the flex will do. You can read up more about the flex. So the flex is what we use. The flex is a unidirectional display approach. It allows you to either set your content in either a row format or a column format. That is why if I specify what we call flex direction on this, I can change the way it is being displayed. So I can say column. It will take it back to the way it was. But row is the default property for our flex direction. So I don't need to specify it again. I don't need to specify it. It is not compulsory for me to specify it. Because I want that to be, and I want our links to be separated, I will do what we call flex like gap. I do what we call gap. So this gap we give spacing between our links in our page. So I can do a spacing of um let me talk about let's say 20 pixel. So there are also don't be surprised with this 20 pixel you are seeing. There are measurement stuff in CSS. There are ways things are being measured in CSS. In our next class, we'll talk about that, how to measure space in CSS, measurement unit in CSS. So let me reload this now. If you are following, you see that this space, there is now space between our element. And also, because of we are using our airline, we want to remove this dots, these bullets in front of our li element. So what you just need to do on your UL, on your another list, is to give it list star, give it none. So anytime in CSS you see that a property is being given the value of none, it means you don't want the effect of that property on that particular element. If I set the display of this UL element to none, which all our properties on this page, all this our link here, all of them are going to disappear. You see, it has disappeared. That is what the value of none means in any HTML document. When you set your list style to none, when you set your display to none, it means you don't want that property to take effect. You don't want it to show on your document. You don't want that thing to show in your document. That is what you are trying to tell the browser. So now let's return it back to our normal property reflex so you can see that. So that is how it works. So next class I'll be discussing more on that. But before I finish, I want to talk about the table that already used in our own assignment. So let's talk about how table work in HTML. So we have the table. So we have what we call the table tag in HTML. So the table tag is for rendering information in a table format in our HTML. And to depict that, we have what we call the table tag. It is called the table tag, and I is like normal table, table. We have what we call the table tag in our HTML. So what the table tag is doing is for us to display our information. So in our table tag, we usually have what we call the table head and the table body. So we have what we call the table head and the table body. So for our table head, we'll do something T-head. It is called, you have to add the T-head property to specify what your table head should be. I'm sure when you have seen a table before, the table usually have heading. So to specify what your table head is, you need to put a child tag that is called the table head under the table tag. That is what the T head is for. It means table head. And now to specify table the table head columns you want to have, all I need to do is do table row, then I do something like this. What this TR means in table means table row. That is the meaning. It means table row. So you are trying to specify a row for your table head. Now you do what you call TH. So I say name, then say score, and say email. So let's see how this works out in my browser. So you guys can see that name, score, uh, name, score, and email. Name, score, and email. Name, score, and email. So this is our table head. Now, if you now want to start passing the value within your document, you wrap that around what we call the table body, T body. We call it the T body. Now, for the table body as well, now everybody, those are the values that we want to put into our document. Now we do what we call the TR again, which is the table rule. Then we put what we call the TD, which is called the table data for each of those our column, for each of the column in our table head. So what is the name? Abimbola. Then what is our score? What should I give Abibola as score? Let's give Abibola 100. And what's our email? Write it at. So like that. Now you will see that each of those things will become aligned under each of these things, under each of the table head we have specified. Abimbola, that's her name. Her score is 100, and this is her email. We can add more table data to this. And all you just need to do is TR under your T body again to add, let's say, rookies data. Just added, let's add rookies data. So we can add Oresis data as well. So that is all we have to do. Then now, can you see it and everybody data? So it is not fine yet because we'll make use of CSS to style those elements. And I'm sure next week or so we'll discuss more on that. So thank you guys. Sorry about the bad network. Please, if you have any question about this lecture, try to reach out to me. If anything is not kind of clear, please make sure you try to reach out to me. And yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.